Hey guys, on this episode of Lykins Motorsports, we're going to be talking about oil modifications for the different Ford blocks, the Windsor, the Cleveland, the big block Ford, and the FE. So we're going to go over just a list of things for each block and in different situations and help you to get the most out of your engine build. Now, before we get started, I just want to say this is how most of you guys want to approach doing block modifications for oiling. Post hole digger and have at it. You can do too much on engine blocks, and especially on FEs. People want to get wild, matching the bearing holes in the main saddles and drilling passages out bigger and this and that, and you can get into some core shift and really ruin a block. So let me preface all of this by saying sometimes little is more. So you just need a die grinder, and I don't really think of any scenarios where you need to have a drill in hand. So a die grinder and some careful placement of some radiuses and some holes, and you'll be good to go. So for our first Ford engine, we're going to start with the Cleveland, and we're also going to mix in the big block Ford, the 385 series, 429, 460, that type of block as well, because the oiling on those are, between those two engine families, are pretty close. They share that same oil passage that runs down the length of the block that intersects with the lifter bores. So let's jump into the Cleveland and the big block Ford. Alright, so we're going to look at the Cleveland and the big block Ford first. By far, those engines have the worst oiling from the factory. Okay, they are not what we would call a priority main oiling system, where the mains and the rods get oiling first. Instead, there's one passage that runs the length of the block, and I'll get into some more detail about that here in a second, that also shares with the lifter bores, and you can see those holes in the lifter bores. That's the main oil passage that runs the length of the block that also feeds the mains and the rods. So if you have worn out lifter bores, if you have lifters that are incorrect, if you're dealing with lifters that really pass a lot of oil to the valve train, you're going to be at a detriment there. Those holes are absolutely huge, and they are to be addressed when using a solid cam or a high RPM cam. There is the oiling passage coming off of the oil pump. So at your 3 o'clock down there at the bottom, that white line that starts is coming off of the oil pump. The first thing that it does is intersect a hole that feeds the cam bearing and the main bearing. Okay, that one little short arrow, vertical arrow that I have drawn there, that's what it encounters first. So it will intersect both the cam bearings and the main bearings, or at least that front cam bearing and main bearing. So in higher output scenarios, I like to run a restricted cam bearing. And I also, in all builds, and what I'm going to do here in a minute, I'm going to make a list of everything in pertaining to that engine family and what to do. But in all builds, I like to plug the main saddle in that number one main saddle. There's a little small hole that corresponds to that little short vertical arrow that you see, and there's a large hole that's about 7/16 in diameter that intersects that long angled arrow to the left there. So I like to plug the hole that leads to that long arrow there in the main saddle. It's redundant oiling. You don't need it. That little feed that comes from that short vertical arrow is ample enough oil to feed both the main bearing and the rod bearing and the cam bearing off of that. So the oil travels, it hits that vertical arrow, it hits that slanted passage just to the left of that vertical arrow, and it goes up to that pipe plug that you see there on the left. That pipe plug is a special plug. It's got a like a bevel or a taper around it so that it doesn't impede the oil flow. And that is your main oil passage that runs the length of the block, and it intersects the lifter bores as I showed you a minute ago. So I will say before, I should have prefaced this first, the oil pump mounting flange, pretty much on every Ford engine, you need to gasket match that hole. You can see at the bottom right of that picture there, I have opened up that oil pump mounting flange a little bit, radius the edges. You just need to make sure that there are no 90-degree turns down in there. FEs are really bad for that, and you need to make sure that everything matches your oil pump at that point. So that's the beginning point from where the oil is introduced into the block. You want to make sure that it is not impeded in any way. On engine blocks where the lifter bores are worn out, or on a solid roller camshaft, I prefer to use lifter bore bushings. You don't want any oil bleeding off there, because if it bleeds off at the lifter bore, it's not going to make it to the main bearings and the rod bearings. So any high RPM build, any build with solid roller lifters, that's my go-to. And I'll put a lifter bore bushing in there. I'll put a small hole, about 70 or 80 thousandths, and that's enough to feed that lifter, the push rod, the rocker arm above it, but it also allows oil, the most oil possible, to get to the main and rod bearings. On blocks that are completely worn out, you want to go ahead and bush those lifter bores, and make sure you don't get any oil bleeds. So this is best done with a BHJ fixture, and that uses a bar that pretty much blueprints the lifter bores back to what they should be from the Ford blueprint. Okay, so those lifter bores can vary from block to block, and on blocks that feature a flat tappet camshaft, this is even more important, because the angle that your lifter interfaces with the cam is very important. If that angle is off, or if there's anything the matter there, then the more chance of wiping out a cam exists. So as a testament to me with experience with all this, there is a main bearing right there that is off of a dyno mule that we return in a little over 8,000 RPM for multiple pulls. We even did some cam swaps and try some different things. But if you look at that main bearing, so that's the cap bearing, that's the bearing that's going to get the most load. You can still see my mic tracks. So you can see the bearing and maybe a little brown portion in the middle of the bearing there, and then a line on each side. Those are the marks that my bore mic make when checking bearing clearances. And the same on those rod bearings. That's the same engine there. You can see some faint, because they're coated bearings, but you can see some faint marks of where my bore mic has been checking the clearances. So if you can still see the bore mic marks on your bearings after you've been whooping on an engine, then you're doing good. Alright, so let's recap here for Cleveland big block Ford. Street build with a hydraulic roller, something similar to that. Work that oil pump mounting flange on a Cleveland, plug that hole in the number one main saddle, and it's best to use restricting cam bearings. Alright, and for Cleveland and big block Ford, solid roller builds, high RPM builds, work that oil pump mounting flange, plug that same hole, restricting cam bearings, and I would add lifter bore bushings to control the amount of oil that gets to the lifters and get more oil to the main bearings and the rod bearings. I generally use an AHV pump, which is a higher volume, higher pressure pump, and that has worked for me. Be very cautious on which lifters that you use for the Cleveland. The oil hole on a solid roller lifter and solid roller only. Okay, so hydraulic roller lifters are the exact same between Windsors and Clevelands. But for solid roller lifters, you want to make sure that the hole in the lifter is 90 degrees perpendicular to where the oil is introduced to the lifter bore. If not, then you will completely flood the top end with oil. So something very important that you need to do there. And on that's the same deal for the Windsor and the FE. The oil hole needs to be 90 degrees from where the oil is introduced to the lifter. So a solid roller Cleveland lifter will be different than a solid roller Windsor or FE lifter in which where the oil hole is put. I know some of the band lifters are they fit either ones because of the way that the oil is metered inside. So just if you're not sure, ask somebody if that is a Cleveland based lifter or not. Alright, so let's hop on over to Windsor land here, and 302, 351 Windsor. The blocks are excellent from the factory, and you will see a lot of aftermarket blocks build on the way that the Windsors were set up. They do have a priority main oiling system, so if you look at the oiling path, you'll see that the oil hits the mains and the rods first, and coming right off the pump, starting at the front of the block, and the oil will travel to the rear of the block so that the lifters will get whatever is left over from the mains and the rods and the cam. So that's very, very important. Obviously you want your main and rod bearings to survive and over what your lifters do. So same deal. There's a view of the way that the oil is introduced coming off of the pump, and you can see in that, if you want to rewind and look at that picture again, you can see where I have done the same oiling mods to that oil pump mounting flange, taken off any sharp edges there, radius that flange, and also worked the inside. So a lot of these blocks tend to have a sharp 90-degree turn, and you can take a ball burr on a die grinder and just work that and take that sharp turn out of it and radius that in there. That's what you want to accomplish. Alright, there's a look at some bearings after we whooped on an engine on the dyno, and there again you can see my mic tracks. That's the number 5 main bearing, so that would be the last one to get oil, and no issues there. This particular engine, we were turning it 8,000 as well. Had aluminum rods, you can see, so right where that locating dowel is, you can see my mic track coming off the bottom of it at the 6 o'clock position. So again, if you can see the way that you measure the bearings, and by the way, the micrometer does not hurt the bearing in any way. It's just it just makes a little mark that you can't even feel. It doesn't dig into the bearing, it just marks it. So if you can see those marks, then again, you know that you've done a good job. Alright, so on a Windsor, on a street type build, hydraulic roller, again, work that oil pump mounting flange, and I like to use a milling M68A pump, which is a high pressure pump, not a high volume pump. these blocks are really small, so it's not something like a big block Ford or an FE where the blocks are larger and the oil galleries are longer and bigger in diameter. You don't really need a lot of oil pump, so a standard volume high pressure pump is all that I use. Okay, and same deal with a race application or a solid cam. And by the way, I know that I said solid roller on the Cleveland stuff, but it'll also pertain to solid flat tappet stuff. So modify that oil pump mounting flange, the high pressure pump, and I would restrict the oil to the lifter galleries. So you can do that in depending on the block, you can do it a couple different ways. On a factory block, in the rear of the block before the oil shoots up to intersect the lifter galleries, you can drill and tap that for a plug, and you can restrict that plug, the amount of oil that comes from it. So that will keep more oil to the main and the rods, the mains and the rods if you need to, and also keep less oil going to the top end. Alright, and last but not least, the Ford FE. So I'm not going to create more work for myself. I am just going to link you to a video that I did last year where I showed how to detail and prep a Ford FE block, which included all the main saddle work, the oil pump mounting flange blending, and all of that. So like I said, I'm not going to create any more work for myself. I'll just link the video at the top of your screen, and you can hop over to YouTube and watch that video again. So as we wind our video up here, I just want to add in one more point, that your oil pan and your pickup are your first line of defense against oil starvation. So a deep, high capacity pump is your best friend. Not only does it give you ample oil volume, but the deeper the pan, the better. It keeps that oil away from the windage of the crank. So if you're starting a higher performance build, throw away the factory stuff. Go with a nice oil pan from Mylodon or Canton, Moroso, Kevco, one of those that will have a higher 6, 7, 8 quart capacity, and the oil pump pickup will have a bigger tube, and that'll ensure that you get enough oil at the very beginning of the oil's journey. Alright guys, I hope this has been a little bit of help to you if you're at home and you're getting ready to start on your engine build. And I get so many emails and texts and phone calls about what oil modifications do I need to do to my block. So that is a hot topic on almost every engine forum that you can get on, and I just think it's kind of overdone, to be honest. And a lot of people want to think that they have a specific recipe for longevity, and it requires drilling these big holes and blending this and moving this, and it just sometimes it's just not necessary. So hopefully this will help you if you're starting out on your own engine build. Hope you guys are having a good week. If you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss out on any more videos from Lykins Motorsports. We've got some cool engine builds coming up, waiting on parts and machine work to be done, and then we can pop some more videos up, so you don't want to miss those. Hope you guys are doing well, and I will see you soon.